This is Asian Insider and I'm Nirmal Ghosh. Now, across Asia, the COVID-19 pandemic has set back poverty reduction goals by a decade, according to some estimates. The ramifications of this are enormous, and we have spoken about this on Asian Insider earlier in the summer. Straits Times correspondents have recently drilled down across Asia on the effects of the pandemic on the younger generation. And specifically today, we look at Asia's two great trading services and financial hubs, Hong Kong and Singapore, with the help of Straits Times political reporter Yuen Sin in Singapore and Hong Kong correspondent Claire Huang in Hong Kong. Yuen Sin, Claire, thank you so much for sparing your time today.
Hi,
So Yuen
Nirmal.
Sin,
Hi, Vincent.
Hi, Nama.
Yuen
Hi,
Sin,
Claire.
you've been looking at the impact. So Yuen Sin, you've been looking at the impact of the pandemic on young people in Singapore. Obviously, the pandemic triggered a recession. A lot of people lost their jobs. Many have had to postpone crucial decisions in their lives. What have you found in terms of the longer effect of the pandemic on this younger generation in Singapore?
Yeah, I think definitely, as you rightly pointed out, right, jobs are at the top of people's minds right now, especially for young people, because this is a very crucial period, of their, working life, right? You're entering into the job market, and job opportunities are harder to come by. So right now, the resident unemployment rate for those below 30 is 7.3% as of June, right? And this is higher than 6% in June last year. And I think there is concern, amongst international experts that if you enter into the job market at a time of crisis, this could lead to long-term wage scarring effects, right? But I think the government is very aware of the need to guard against this, and they've kind of put in a lot of initiatives to have jobs and training opportunities for young people. So they're working with companies to kind of open up traineeships and other internship opportunities while young people are still while they're still facing challenges in finding a job. And I think many young people also have to temper their expectations and settle for something that may not be what they had in mind, but can still allow them to acquire the skills they need in the long run. But when you look at the housing market, the property market has stayed fairly resilient. But one trend that I think experts are seeing is that people are moving away from buying built-to-order purchase flats, right? Which would take a longer time to complete, and they're turning to the resale market instead.
Claire, over to you in Hong Kong now. Same question really to you. A broad question. What has been the impact on young people in Hong Kong? I know you've been looking at housing as well, which has always been a critical component of living in Hong Kong. Can you share something about what you have found?
Well, Nirmal, Hong Kong is the most unaffordable property market in the world. The prices are through the roof, no pun intended. Prices are never quite come down over here. So just to give a sense, at the moment, right, a private 400 square foot unit can reach Hong Kong $6 million, which is about 1 million Sing dollars. And that's for a unit of this size, easily in a fringe location or even newer estates. Now, some things that's worked to a certain extent for younger generation would be the pandemic and weak global economic conditions in terms of housing. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, in October warned of a long, uneven and uncertain recovery. This weak global sentiment and the pandemic have depressed property buyer sentiments in Hong Kong for a short period. As on top of that, you've got job cuts underway. More job cuts could come as the pandemic lasts. So the current low interest rate environment is good for buyers who are house hunting, and some of them are taking the opportunity to get a smaller and more manageable mortgage loan. So I think there's a group that's seizing this opportunity. But I think here's where I like to point out, the other side of it, which is those counting on investments to pay for a new home may be in for a surprise depending on what kind of investments they have, right? Because you have a low interest rate environment. This is a double-edged sword in that sense. And the Hong Kong residential market has been fairly resilient, according to JLL. And that's because it has a chronic lack of supply. And generally, you have an affluent society. So mass residential prices have more or less held steady. But the situation may change as more companies start to, lay off staff. And Hong Kong's economy is now in a recession, and it's expected to remain in a recession. So defaults are already on the rise. Over in Asia, though, Nirmal, the trend is pretty much mixed. China, for instance, as people putting a pause on house buying. In Malaysia, you have got bargain hunting. Some of them are snapping up houses that are 20-25% down the previous price. Bucking the trend will be the Philippines, where home prices shot up as more Chinese buyers snap up high-end units. In Japan, though, the units outside of Tokyo are gaining popularity. And this is a trend that you can spot in some other cities too. And it's driven by the fact that people have to spend more time at home. So they're more open to properties that are further out. And they want properties that are bigger and more bang for their buck in short.
Even before the pandemic, there was a sense that optimism was in short supply. Times were changing, adaptation was always a challenge, the US-China trade war was casting a pall and so forth. And then came the novel coronavirus, and 2020 was a year in which people have been stretched to the limit, very challenging, and especially so in Hong Kong, in fact. So I'm going to ask the same question to both of you, but I'll start with you, Claire, since you've been in Hong Kong and covering the protests as well, and then the pandemic. What is the sense you get from there among the young people in terms of is optimism? Does optimism still prevail? How are people feeling? What is the sentiment?
Well, there was a study that was done by the University of Hong Kong. They surveyed more than 11,000 people from February to July this year. And they found more than 70% of them showed signs of moderate to severe depression. And they found that many people basically here were showing signs of trauma, depression after last year's protests, and the unrest was often violent. And then, you have now got, like what you said, the health and economic crisis. So 40% of the respondents in this survey had symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. A sizable number of people, more than 4,000 of those polled, appeared to be suffering from both PTSD and depression. The situation is alarming, according to the academics and the professors. They're saying that the people here didn't feel better even when they were able to stay away from the source of their stress. So they're saying that there could be more people who are developing mental disorders in that sense. And there is a bit of a doom and gloom. And if, Beijing has just disqualified 4 pandemic opposition lawmakers. So I think that's going to add on to the perception that Beijing is crushing dissent, which it has denied. And I think all these news, which are quite negative for Hong Kong, is not going to make the people feel any better as they struggle with, the daily living and making ends meet because, Cathay Pacific had cuts. So it's a bit of a doom and gloom over here in Hong Kong right now.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think the tail of the pandemic is going to be very long, and mental health is one of the underlying issues which is going to be more and more prominent going forward. What about Singapore?
Yeah, I think it's definitely less bleak in Singapore, but definitely experts are also worried about the pandemic taking a toll on the mental health of young people. So the National Youth Council has also done a survey to look at how young people are doing in terms of the mental health, and 1 in 2 of them say that the pandemic has negatively affected their mental well-being. And I think many experts and mental health organizations are worried about a second wave, right? Because in Singapore, I think the first wave came during the circuit breaker when people were suffering from the effects of isolation. But right now, many of the concerns would be about whether young people whose families or who they themselves have been affected by the bigger economic outlook would also see this having an impact on the psychological well-being. But I think on the flip side, I mean, in Singapore this year we also had the elections, right? And I think because of the pandemic and how it has such far-reaching effects on every single aspect of our lives, young people have also seen the impact of policies and on global affairs and how that translates into issues on the ground. And many of them have started to reach out and set up their own social initiatives, or they have become more politically aware. They've started to volunteer or advocate for migrant worker causes, because of the outbreak that we have seen in dormitories. So I think in a way, for a country like Singapore, where activism and advocacy may be something that's not in the mainstream, more young people have started to realize that they need to kind of step out and take matters into their own hands, right? So maybe this could also forge better long-term trends for Singapore, and they're also getting used to having to adjust to uncertainty, whether it be their life paths or in terms of their jobs and education trajectory.
Fascinating. Yes, this issue of adaptation and looking at alternatives is something which has come out all over the world, including the new awareness of underlying factors, underlying issues in society, has grabbed the attention of people. I mean, the pandemic has thrown a very harsh spotlight on some of these underlying factors. Well, thank you very much, Claire. Yuen Sin, thank you very much, and take care out there. All the best in your reporting. Asia is a particularly young continent, but ironically, it is young people who are bearing the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic. Life as we know it has changed fundamentally, perhaps even permanently, and it is up to the younger people to find a way and adapt to these new challenging conditions. For Asian Insider, I'm Nirmal Ghosh.